Hello, welcome back to Teen Story Share. This week we're going to be continuing reading from The Ghosts of Heaven by Marcus Sedgwick. We began this last week, so if you missed that, you may want to listen to last week's first, which I'll link below. Otherwise, I think you might be a bit lost. As a reminder for those that were here last week, so if you were not here last week, this would be a spoiler for you, just a warning. But for those that were, our main character, who's traveling on a spaceship to a new Earth, has discovered that 6 of the 500 people sleeping in stasis on board are dead. So he needs to figure out what's going on. Alright. Of all the problems that faced the world, there was one that nothing could be done about, because it was caused by the success of eradicating all the other threats to human life: overpopulation. It took centuries longer for the world to civilize than anyone ever anticipated. But eventually it did. As artificially grown meat solved the food crises, as the threat of climate change stabilized with the disappearance of fossil fuels and their replacement with renewable power, as even the poorest countries in the world became rich enough to be well off, as the driving forces for wars dissipated, as finally people everywhere became comfortable enough that their need for religion waned and dwindled, a truly united world global government faced the last remaining issue. There was no longer enough room for the billions of people living in the thin film of habitable space wrapped around the planet. Deserts had been hydrated, floating cities spawned, even the Antarctic colonized, and yet still the birth rate shot ever upward. As the memory of times of war and conflict began to raise itself in countries' collective minds, the world clamored for a solution to the problem. In response, birth limits were introduced, and so the population began to slowly level off. By now, the question of the long-term prospects for the human race was high in people's minds. It was, many people felt, in man's nature to explore, to expand, in short, to live. The desire to survive and prosper, it was argued, is the very meaning of life itself. It must go on, forever, without limit, and to deny that would be to deny life. Mankind should not live with birth quotas and ascent forms and enforced sterilization. Billions of dollars were spent merely researching potential solutions, but they all revolved around the same idea. A new Earth must be found or made. As attempts to seed an atmosphere on Mars repeatedly failed, a new strand of thought emerged, so very unthinkable until all other possibilities had been exhausted. We must move to some distant and already Earth-like planet. The problems facing such an endeavor were plentiful, but the biggest was also the simplest. The nearest habitable world known was very far away, so far that it would take light around 170 years to reach it. The planet, orbiting a star in the constellation of Laika, had been dubbed New Earth centuries before anyone ever thought of going there. All the analysis showed this distant world was a close cousin to our own as could ever be found anywhere, an Eden waiting to be colonized. But, ever adaptable, the people of the world began to change their viewpoint. This was a journey of a previously unimaginable kind, and yet there was nothing in theory to prevent it. Each obstacle in the way of such a mission was attacked ruthlessly. Trillions were spent researching matters from zero waste nutrients to chlorophyll-based oxygen generators, to the issues of the deleterious effects of space travel on the human body, from muscle and bone wastage issues to electromagnetic shielding against interstellar radiation. The question of how to achieve near-speed light travel was resolved after 30 years of development on the Clark Drive, a radiation pressure engine that steadily imparted impulse to the mass of the ship. Eventually, each and every problem was defeated. Finally, there only remained the question of who would dare to venture on such a journey. People reminded each other of previous epic journeys made by mankind. History books told of the voyage of the Mayflower, but the comparison was weak. These would not be 100 souls on board a ship crossing the ocean in a couple of months to colonize another continent, a continent much like the one they left, with other ships soon to follow. Though New Earth was 170 light years away, the song's journey would take only around 100 years of ship time to complete. One of the advantages of traveling close to light speed being that time dilation would make clocks on board run slower. With its passengers effectively frozen in time until they reached New Earth, and the 10 sentinels to awake just 10 times for half a day to monitor the ship's progress. These people would never come back. News of them would never come back. Who would go on such a mission? The answer, we should not have been surprised, was millions of people. As 5 toroid ships were prepared by the global government, one for each continent, the number of people not only willing but desperate to be part of the first wave of colonization grew. Debates raged endlessly. Even those who had no interest in going had strong views on who should be allowed to. Scientists would be needed, that much everyone agreed. Technicians of all kinds, doctors, engineers. But what of the other areas of human life? Should artists be included, and musicians? Wouldn't a life without such things be pointless to the human animal? The arguments continued, but when it was announced that each of the 5 ships would hold just 500 passengers, the arguments erupted into disbelief. Of the 45 billion people on the planet, how could just 2,500 be chosen? And what of these guardians, the sentinels? How could there be just 10 per ship, 50 in all? Who would ever dare to make such choices? What calculations or formulas could scientists ever derive to neatly give such answers? There was one calculation that was indisputable. The minimum number of people per ship should be at least 500. Below that number, there would not be a sufficiently diverse gene pool to support the healthy rebirth of the human species on New Earth. Below that number, the possibility of the founder effect was too great. The genes of one person could start to dominate the population with, theoretically at least, disastrous results. But who would be the 500, and who would be the 10? Keir Bowman knew he would be among them. Yes, he'd worked on the America's continent toroid, developing software for control systems. Yes, he'd trained as an astronaut. Yes, he had no family ties, no wife, child, or parents living. His psychometric testing had shown him to be a near-perfect candidate for a sentinel. Early experiments in space travel within the solar system had quickly demonstrated that no matter how high a compatibility score a group of astronauts might achieve, given the time scales involved, factions in politics and even fights would develop eventually in the close confines of the ship. The answer was the loner, the individual who preferred no other company than his own thoughts. Of course, the danger was that such individuals often displayed borderline psychopathic traits. The key was to find just the right person, calm, contained, at peace with their true nature, able to go for long periods in isolation. Bowman knew he would be one of them, partly because he was the near-perfect candidate anyway, and partly because he'd hacked the computers of the America's Selection Committee in order to erase the report of obsessional tendencies in his psychometric test results. Come back next week to find out why did the 6 die and other mysterious revelations. All right, have a good weekend. Bye.